The snow on Velan did not fall. It moved sideways, always sideways, like it had somewhere better to be. Dario Vaz had been on this frozen rock for 11 months, and he still could not get used to it. He pulled his coat tighter and kept walking. He was not supposed to be out here. The sensor log had flagged an anomaly near Ridge 7, something large near the outer debris field, and since every other medic on shift had found a reason to be busy, Dario had taken the call himself. His boots broke through the ice crust with every step. The wind was loud enough to make thinking difficult. He almost walked past it. The dragon was the same color as the glacier. That was the only reason it had not shown up clearly on thermal. Its body temperature had dropped so far that it barely read warmer than the ice around it. Dario stopped when he saw the shape. At first he thought it was a collapsed ridge formation. Then one silver eye opened and looked at him. He did not run. He was not brave. He was just too cold to move quickly. The creature was young. He could tell that even without knowing anything about dragons. It was not as large as the ones described in the assembly wildlife files he had skimmed once during a boring shift. Its white scales were dull, almost gray in patches. One wing was folded at a wrong angle, the membrane torn and crusted with frozen blood. It had been there for a while, long enough for the ice to start forming around its legs. Dario stood and looked at it. It looked back at him. He called it in. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Rass, answered on the second ping. Dario described what he was seeing. There was a pause. Then Rass said, "Leave it. Those things are dangerous even when they're healthy. If it's dying, not our problem." "It's trapped," Dario said. "There's ice forming around its legs." "Voss, leave it." The line clicked off. Dario stood there for another moment. The wind moved sideways. The dragon watched him with that one open silver eye. It did not growl or snap. It just watched in the way that something watches when it has already accepted that help is not coming. He opened his kit bag. The next 3 days were the most uncomfortable of his life, and he had once spent 2 weeks on a troop transport with a broken heating unit. He could not move the dragon. It was far too heavy, so he worked around it. He cleared the ice from its legs in sections, using the small thermal tool from his kit that was meant for field surgery. He patched the wing membrane with the closest thing he had to flexible sealant, which was a tissue bonding compound not designed for something this size. He built a wind block out of debris panels he dragged from the ridge supplies shed, which he was also not supposed to touch. He slept in 2-hour stretches in his suit, back against the wind block. The dragon did not make it easy. It was not hostile. It never snapped at him, never moved to hurt him, but it was heavy and uncooperative in the way that something is uncooperative when it does not understand what is happening to it. He had to work around its breathing, which came in long, slow rolls of freezing air. Twice, it shifted its weight and knocked him down. The second time he sat in the snow for a full minute before getting back up. On the second day, it let him close enough to press his gloved hand against the side of its neck to check its pulse. The scales were cold but not stone cold. There was a heartbeat, slow but there. He talked to it while he worked, not because he thought it understood, just because the silence was worse. He told it the tissue compound would probably itch when it set. He told it that getting upright was going to be mostly its job because he was one person and it was enormous. On the third day it stood. Not steadily. It took 4 attempts and each one sent Dario scrambling out of the way. But on the 4th try it got all 4 legs under itself and held. The damaged wing hung lower than the other, but it was no longer dragging. The gray patches on its scales had lightened slightly. It stood there in the sideways snow and looked at him. Dario looked back. He was exhausted and his hands were shaking from the cold, and he had a reprimand waiting for him back at the station that he already did not care about. "You're going to be fine," he told it, though he was not completely sure that was true. The dragon held his gaze for a long moment. Then it turned and walked toward the deep ridge, slow and deliberate, each step careful on the ice. It did not look back. At the edge of the white where the glacier slope dropped away, it paused for just a second. Then it was gone. Dario gathered his kit bag. He walked back to the station. Ras reprimanded him for 30 minutes. He wrote stray fauna, released safely in the incident log, and went asleep for 12 hours. He did not think about it much after that. There were other shifts, other calls, other cold days on other frozen rocks. Life moved forward the way it does, not in dramatic turns, just ordinary days stacking on top of each other until years became a number too large to feel. He moved on. The dragon did not. The cargo manifest for the day listed 47 containers, 3 of which had incorrect weight tags, and 1 of which had somehow been labeled as miscellaneous biological when it was clearly full of pipe fittings. Dario Voss stared at the screen, made a note, and drank the last of his cold tea. Outpost Faren was not the kind of place people ended up by choice. It sat on the edge of the Yanari border zone, a mid-sized trade and logistics hub that processed freight, managed docking schedules, and occasionally hosted diplomatic staff who could not afford to be seen at more important stations. The walls were the gray color of things that had been cleaned too many times. The corridors smelled faintly of recycled air and machine oil. Dario had worked here for 6 years, and he knew every faulty panel, every vent that rattled, and every shortcut through the lower decks. He liked it fine. His coworker Oren dropped into the chair beside him and put his feet on the desk. Oren was 29, easily startled, and had a talent for making problems sound worse than they were. "Sensor grids reading something weird near the outer perimeter," Oren said. Dario did not look up. How weird. Large multiple contacts moving slow. Oren paused, very slow. Probably ice debris from the Velen drift. It comes through every year around this time. Maybe. Oren did not sound convinced. Also, the Admiral arrived. Dario looked up. Admiral Ren Galt had come in on a military transport with 6 officers and no advance notice, which was exactly the kind of thing that made station administrators lose sleep. Dario had seen him once before, at a logistics briefing 3 years ago. The man had the look of someone who had made too many hard decisions and stopped feeling bad about them. The Yanari consul, Merck, had been on the station for a week already. He was avian, tall, 6-winged, with pale gray feathers and eyes that did not blink the way human eyes did. He spoke perfect standard, which somehow made him harder to read, not easier. His delegation occupied the upper guest level and ate meals alone. Galt and Merck had spoken exactly twice since the Admiral's arrival. Both times the conversation had ended within 10 minutes. Dario learned all of this from Oren, who learned it from the station's head of hospitality, who learned it from a maintenance worker who had been fixing a vent panel near the conference room. "They're fighting about the border agreements," Oren said. "The new assembly terms would reclassify the human stations along this corridor. We'd lose independent operating status." "I know," Dario said. "If we lose independent status, the assembly can route freight through here without paying the standard tariffs. They can also." "I know, Oren." Oren was quiet for a moment. "Are you worried?" Dario considered the question honestly. He was 46 years old. He had lived through 4 separate rounds of border renegotiations, 2 station-wide power failures, and a Yanari trade embargo that had lasted 8 months and made everyone on the station very tired of eating protein paste. Each time, something had shifted and something had settled and life had continued. "Not particularly," he said. That night Dario was doing a walkthrough of the outer loading section when he noticed the outer sensor grid had gone quiet. Not damaged, the indicators all red-green, just silent. No movement data, no atmospheric readings, nothing, like something had carefully pressed mute. He filed a maintenance request and went to bed. 2 decks up, in the station's small observation room, Consul Merck stood at the window for a long time. His 6 wings were folded tight against his back, which among the Yanari meant tension. He was looking at the outer perimeter. He had been there for an hour. He had received a message from the Assembly Council 3 days ago. It was short and it was not good. The glacial survey team on Veland had gone quiet. No distress signal, no final transmission, just silence as if someone had reached over and turned them off. The Council's official position was equipment failure. Merck knew that was not true, because the survey team had been using Yanari deep range instruments that did not fail without logging a reason. Whatever had stopped them had done it faster than the logging system could respond. He had not told Galt. He told himself this was because there was nothing confirmed yet. That was partly true. The other part was that Merck had read the old Veland wildlife classification files during his transit to Faren. He was thorough, whatever else could be said about him, and one entry had stayed in his mind. Frost dragons, Veland glacial range, status, near extinction. Last confirmed sighting, 22 years ago. The entry had a footnote. A human medic had filed an incident report from Veland Station. Stray fauna, released safely. Released, the file noted, near Ridge 7, which sat directly above the glacial cave system that connected to the survey team's operating zone. Merck looked at the dark perimeter. His wings shifted. He went back to his room and sent a coded message to the council. It said, "Recommend early conclusion of negotiations." It said, "The situation on the ground may be more complicated than the survey team's reports indicated." It said, "We may have moved too quickly." He did not sleep after sending it. 300 meters below him, Dario was already asleep. He was dreaming about nothing in particular. Outside the station, in the dark beyond the sensor range, the snow moved sideways. Something was watching the lights. The faulty antenna on the station's east side had been on Dario's maintenance list for 2 weeks. Nobody had fixed it because it was technically outside and technically required a cold weather suit, and technically nobody wanted to. Dario suited up before breakfast, clipped his tool bag to his belt, and went out through the east airlock. The cold hit him the same way it always did, not gradually, but all at once, like a door being opened into a different world. He found the antenna housing, identified the loose coupling, and had it fixed in 4 minutes. He was standing up to leave when he saw the shadow. It was large. He looked up. The second shadow was larger. Then a third one. He did not move. The shapes were circling above the station in long, slow arcs, white against a pale sky, almost invisible. Almost. He tracked the largest one as it banked and descended, dropping in a long, silent curve toward the outer landing field. Dario walked to the edge of the platform and looked down. She landed with almost no sound. That was the first thing that surprised him. Something that size should have shaken the ground, should have made noise on the way down. Instead, she touched the snow like she had been doing it all her life, which she had. Her scales caught the flat gray light and threw it back as something colder and whiter. She was enormous. She was twice the size he remembered. Her wingspan, half folded now, stretched wider than a docking bay. Her head turned. The silver eyes found him immediately. Dario stood very still. Then every alarm on the station went off at once. The next 4 minutes were loud. Galt's soldiers came through 3 separate access points onto the field level. The station's perimeter defense system snapped to active. Oren appeared somewhere behind Dario, making a sound that was not quite words. Through the observation windows above, Dario could see movement, staff, officers, Merck's delegation pressing to the glass. The dragon did not react to any of it. She did not look at the soldiers. She did not look at the guns. She looked at Dario, who was still standing on the platform above the field, tool bag clipped to his belt, cold weather suit not quite zipped at the collar. She walked toward him. She moved through the soldiers' line like it was not there, not aggressively, just without interest. 2 men stepped back. One held his ground for about 3 seconds before moving aside. Her footsteps left deep impressions in the frozen ground, spaced wide and deliberate. Galt's voice came over the external speaker. "Stand down, do not engage. Voss, get away from the edge." Dario did not get away from the edge. She came to a stop below the platform, which put her head roughly at his level. He could see the old scar on her left wing membrane, a pale line through the white, where the tissue compound had bonded the tear shut 22 years ago. It had healed well, better than he had expected, honestly, given the materials he had used. He could hear his own heartbeat. He could see the frost forming with each slow breath she exhaled. He said, "You got big." Her head tilted. A sound came from her that was not a roar and not a word, more like wind moving through hollow stone. The translation unit on Oren's wrist, 20 feet behind Dario, crackled and produced 3 syllables that meant nothing in standard language, and then a phrase the unit flagged as partial. "Det carrier. Found." Galt was talking again. Something about containment, something about protocols. Dario was not listening. He asked her quietly, "Do you remember me?" She lowered her head. Slowly, the way she had done, nothing quickly, not 22 years ago, not now. She brought her head down until the silver eyes were exactly level with his face, close enough that he could see his own reflection in them. Small and cold-suited and slightly underdressed. She held that position. She did not blink. Dario reached out slowly, not reaching for anything, just the gesture of it, and pressed his hand flat against the side of her jaw. The scales were cold. Not glacier cold, not dying cold. Just the natural cold of something that lived in ice and was fine with it. Behind him, someone made a sharp noise, probably Oren. One of Galt's officers took 3 steps forward with a weapon raised. Galt said sharply, "Hold." The officer held. Dario did not move his hand. The dragon did not move at all. They stayed like that for a long moment, a middle-aged logistics coordinator and a creature that should not have been here, in a moment that should not have been happening, while the alarms continued, pointless and unheard, and 6 more white shapes circled slowly in the sky above. Then she made the sound again, longer this time. The translation unit caught more of it, something about memory, something about returning to the place a debt was made, something it rendered as approximately the one who did not look away. Dario took his hand back. He looked up at the circling shapes, then back at her. "You came a long way," he said. She breathed out a slow roll of frozen air. He thought, though he could not have said why, that it was an answer. Not a word, just presence, just confirmation. She was here, she had found him. Whatever came next, she had come back. He turned to look at Galt, who was staring at him from across the field with an expression that was trying to be professional and not quite making it. "I think," Dario said, "we should probably talk." Nobody wanted to be in the same room as the dragon. That was the first problem. Galt would not allow Sora inside the station. That was what Dario was calling her now, because the dragon felt impersonal and she deserved better than that. So they set up in the outer loading dock, which had a wide overhead door they left open to the field where she could see and be seen. It was also -11 degrees. Oren had brought 4 thermal blankets and was wearing all of them at once. Sora sat at the dock entrance, patient and enormous, while Dario, Galt, 2 officers, and a reluctant Oren arranged themselves on cargo containers in a rough half-circle. Merk had refused to attend. He sent a junior staff member named Pell instead, a young Yanari, small for his species, who had spent the first 10 minutes trying not to visibly panic. The translation was the second problem. Standard Yanari and human translation units were not built for Velan dragon speech. The patterns were old, not cataloged. Oren's unit produced fragments. Dario's unit produced different fragments. Together, they got maybe half of any given statement, and the half they got was often rearranged. They solved this slowly over 2 hours by cross-referencing fragments and asking Sora to repeat things. She was patient about this. Dario had the sense that she had been waiting to say these things for a long time, and was not in a hurry now that she had started. What she told them, piece by piece, was this. The Yanari Assembly had been sending survey drones into the Veland glacial system for 4 years. Not a new thing, survey drones came through regularly for atmospheric science, everyone knew that. But these drones were different. They went deep. They mapped the subterranean ice channels and the mineral deposits beneath them. They did not broadcast on standard frequencies. They used a Yanari military band that only became obvious if you were listening from directly above, which the dragons were, because the glacial ridges above the deep channels were where they lived. The dragons had watched the drones for 4 years. They had noted the routes, the frequencies, the depth maps the drones were building. They understood what a mineral extraction survey looked like because they had watched one before on the eastern moon 40 years ago. That moon had been stripped. Nothing lived there now. Sora drew this in the frost at the dock entrance with one careful claw. Not words, shapes. The subterranean channels, the drone paths, the extraction sites on the eastern moon for comparison. It was a map, and it was detailed, and it covered an area of floor about 12 feet wide. Galt looked at it for a long time. He said, very quietly, "This is why the negotiations broke down." Dario nodded. The new border agreements the Assembly was pushing would reclassify the human stations in this corridor and grant the Assembly open operational rights in adjacent zones, including the Veland glacial system. It was not about trade tariffs at all. It had never been about trade tariffs. Pell, the young Yanari assistant, had gone very still. He was looking at the map on the floor. He said almost to himself, "I didn't know." Dario believed him. "The survey team that went silent," Dario said, looking at Sora. She made a sound. The translation unit rendered it as they left. Dario looked at the unit, then at her. She made the sound again with slight differences. Oren's unit added, encouraged to leave, not harmed. "She moved them on," Oren said. "She ran off a Yanari Assembly survey team," one of Galt's officers said flatly. "They were on her land," Dario said. He did not say it loudly. He said it the way you state something that is just true. Galt turned to look at him. "She does not have legal standing to claim that land under Assembly Territorial Code." "I understand that. I'm not saying she has legal standing. I'm saying they were on her land." Galt held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at the map. Sora produced a new sound. This one the translation units caught more cleanly, because she slowed down for it, something that Dario realized she was doing deliberately, adjusting her speech to what the machines could handle, which meant she had been listening to the unit's processing pauses and adapting to them. It rendered as, "I come to speak before the deciding council, to show what I have seen, if a human will stand with me." Galt straightened. The Assembly Council does not recognize Veland frost dragons as a registered sapient species. She cannot testify before any formal body. "Can she testify before an informal one?" Dario asked. "There's no such thing. There's an emergency session Consul Merck can call. Station level, not full assembly, if 2 parties request it." Galt frowned. "How do you know that?" "I read the protocols when I transferred here. I read everything when I transfer somewhere. It's a habit." Dario paused. "Merck won't want to call it, but if he thought things were about to get messy on his own station, he might prefer a session to whatever the alternative is." Above the dock, through the open ceiling, the other 6 dragons were visible as white shapes against white sky, present and quiet, watching. Galt looked at the map on the floor. He looked at the dragons in the sky. He looked at Dario. "You are a logistics coordinator," he said. "Grade 3, Dario said. "Yes." Galt picked up his comm unit. He did not look happy. He looked like a man who had just realized the situation was much bigger than his briefing had suggested, and was deciding what to do about it. He started making calls. Consul Merck called the emergency session at midday. That told Dario two things. The consul had received new information that scared him, and he wanted it handled before more people noticed. The session ran through the station's main comm relay, projected on the conference room wall. 8 assembly council members in 8 separate frames, formal and distant, the assembly seal in the corner. Merck stood at the head of the table in full diplomatic colors, wings folded precisely. Galt sat to one side. Dario sat at the far end because someone had to pull in a spare chair from the corridor. The first 20 minutes were procedure. Merck opened the session in Yennari formal language, which the room system translated with a half-second delay. The council members asked standard questions about the station's status, the nature of the reported incident, the number of dragons present. Then Merck said that he was requesting the council formally decline the testimony of non-enrolled species, citing Assembly Code Section 14, which required a registered sapient sponsor for any non-enrolled party to speak before a formal body. It was clean. It was procedurally correct. Dario recognized it as the move you make when you want something dismissed without looking like you dismissed it. Nobody volunteered. Galt looked at the table. The 2 legal officers looked at the table. Pell, sitting near the wall, looked at his hands. Sponsoring an unrecognized species before the council was the kind of move that ended careers quietly, in small ways, for a long time afterward. Dario raised his hand. Merck's wings shifted. One of the council members leaned forward in her frame. "I am Dario Voss," he said. "Logistics Coordinator, Grade 3, Outpost Faren. I am sponsoring the testimony." Galt said quietly and without moving his mouth much, "Voss, you do not have to." "I know," Dario said. He kept his eyes on the screen. One of the council members, an older Yennari with white-edged feathers at his temples, said, in a measured voice, "Under what basis does a Grade 3 logistics officer claim right of sponsorship?" "Under Section 14, Paragraph 2, Dario said. "Any station resident of continuous tenure over 3 years may serve as sapient sponsor in an emergency session. I have been here 6 years. My name is on the lease." A pause. The council members conferred in murmured Yennari that the translation system struggled with. Merck did not look at Dario. The council accepted the sponsorship. There was no legal way to refuse it. What followed was unlike anything Dario had ever watched in a conference room, and he had sat through some very dull things in conference rooms. Sara could not enter the station, so Oren had run a secondary feed to the loading dock, pointing a camera at her. Her image appeared in a new frame on the screen, enormous and white, and oddly still against the gray dock walls. She spoke for 40 minutes. The translation was imperfect and everyone knew it, but what came through was enough. She described the drone patterns, the survey routes, the depth mapping. She described the eastern moon and what had been taken from it and what it looked like now. She described the frequency band the drones used, which 2 of the council members visibly recognized. Dario could see it on their faces before they controlled their expressions. She described her kin, how few they were, how the glacial channels ran directly beneath the cave systems where young frost dragons grew, how extraction would collapse those systems, how she knew, because she had watched the eastern moon, that once extraction started it did not stop. At one point she produced a sound the translation unit rendered simply as, "I ask for this to be seen, not fought over, seen." One of the council members asked, through Merck, why the dragons had not filed a formal report through standard assembly channels. Dario answered before anyone else could, "Because they are not enrolled. They have no access to standard assembly channels. The process does not include them." He paused. "That seems like the relevant thing to examine." Merck said tightly, "This session is not a review of assembly enrollment procedures." "No," Dario agreed. It's a session called because a survey program that did not exist officially was found out by a species that has no official voice. He looked at the council frames. I am just a logistics worker, but I know what a paper trail that goes nowhere looks like, and I know why people build them. The oldest council member was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The survey program records." "We would like to request them," Galt said. He had been watching Dario for the last several minutes with an expression that had moved gradually from skeptical to something more careful. The session ended 40 minutes later. The council agreed to a full review. The survey program was suspended. 2 council members requested a second session within the week. Merck closed the feed without speaking to anyone in the room. He walked out. His wings were held so tightly against his back that they trembled slightly. Pell stayed. He looked at Dario and said, in careful standard language, "What you did, the sponsorship, the questions, that was very deliberate." "I just said what was true," Dario said. Pell looked at him for a moment. He was young and clearly trying to decide if Dario was being modest or genuine. He concluded genuine. "Among my people," Pell said, "we have a word for someone who chooses the inconvenient truth over comfortable silence. It does not translate well, but it means roughly someone who makes things worse in the short term so they can be better in the long one." Dario thought about that. "That sounds exhausting." "It is," Pell said, "but here you are." 2 days after the session, the station settled back toward something close to normal. Merck's delegation packed and left on a morning transport, quiet and unhurried, which was somehow more unsettling than a rushed exit. Galt stayed to finish his reports. The assembly suspended the glacial survey program pending council review. Nothing was resolved exactly, but nothing had collapsed either, and on a border station in a disputed corridor, that counted for something. Sara's kin left one by one. Dario watched them go from the east platform, the same platform he had been standing on when they arrived. They went the way they came, no announcement, no ceremony. A shape in the sky, then sky without a shape. By the second morning, only Sara remained, settled at the far edge of the outer field where the snow was deep enough to cover her feet. Oren asked if she was going to stay permanently. Dario said he did not think so. Oren seemed disappointed. Pell stayed as well, on his own request. He had sent a message to the Assembly Council explaining that he wished to remain at Faren as an informal liaison while the review proceeded. He had not asked Merck first. When Dario pointed this out, Pell said, in his careful standard language, that Consul Merck was no longer in a strong position to object to much. On the second night, Dario could not sleep, which happened sometimes. He put on his coat and went outside. He did not have a destination. He walked the outer path that looped the east side of the station, where the field lights were low and the sky was wide and you could see the stars on a clear night. He found her at the far end of the path, where it reached the ridge. She was lying on the snow with her head toward the ice fields, watching something only she could see. She did not turn when he approached. She knew he was there. He sat down on a cargo block someone had left near the ridge marker, which was not the most comfortable seat, but it was available. He pulled his coat tighter. They stayed like that for a while. No words, no translation units. Just 2 things sitting in the cold and looking at the same general direction. He asked, after a while, why she had come to him specifically. Out of all the humans she could have chosen, all the stations she could have gone to, she had found one logistics coordinator on a mid-range border post and flown a very long way. She turned her head. The silver eyes caught the field lights and held them. She spoke slowly, and his unit, which he had tucked in his coat pocket, produced the translation in pieces with a soft click each time a phrase resolved. "You did not look away." He sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "Anyone would have." She made a low sound, brief and final. His unit rendered it as "no." He thought about that. He thought about Ras, his old lieutenant on Veland who had told him to leave. He thought about Galt, ready to open fire. He thought about every sensible, reasonable person who had looked at a dying creature in the snow and made the practical decision. He did not think he was special. He still did not. He had just been the one standing there who could not make his feet move in the other direction. But maybe that was enough. Maybe it had always been enough. He looked at her, at the old scar on her left wing membrane, faint and pale, barely visible now against the white. 22 years. She had carried that scar for 22 years, and she had come back. Not for politics, not to win anything. Just because something had been done for her once and she did not forget. "You didn't have to do this for me," he said. "The session, the testimony, it was your land and your kin. You would have done it anyway eventually." She turned her head to look at him fully. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, and the unit rendered it cleanly because she was speaking slowly for him now. He had noticed she did that. "I came for both. The land and you. A debt that is owed is owed. This is the way." He nodded. "All right," he said, "thank you." She held his gaze for one more long moment. Then she stood, unhurried, and shook the snow from her scales. She stretched both wings out fully, and even after days of seeing her, the wingspan still made him hold his breath. She folded them back, looked once more at the ice fields, then looked at him. She walked to the ridge and stopped at the edge. Below it, the glacier dropped away into the dark. She did not look back this time. She stepped off and dropped, and the white closed around her as she descended into the ice valleys below, silent and clean, like something returning to where it belonged. Dario sat on the cargo block for a few minutes after she was gone. The field lights hummed. The stars were out. It was cold enough that his breath made small clouds. Then he got up, went inside, and made coffee. Oren was already in the office when he arrived, feet on the desk, reading something on his unit. He looked up and said, "Is she gone?" "Yes," Dario said. "Are you famous now?" Dario sat down. He opened his manifest screen. 47 containers. The docking computer accepted his password on the first try, which had not happened in 3 weeks. He looked at it for a moment. "I hope not," he said. He got to work.